Hi folks, I hope you're all doing well. Last couple of nights I've spent in a little camper stop in Algarrobo, which is along the coast of southern Spain in Andalusia. And yesterday evening when I was looking through my my diary, I realised that I was here actually almost a year ago. And it got me thinking about the last year. What a strange year it's been. And, you know, looking back to this time last year, who knew what was going to be happening in 2020? And it gave me the idea just to look back over the last year, to be honest, and where was I, what have I done, what's it been like really with the COVID pandemic, obviously. And if I look back in January of this year, I was actually in Spain. I travelled down through France over a 2 or 3 month period, and eventually got into Spain, where I was in January, and really worked my way all the way down the coast until eventually towards the middle of January, the third week in January, I ended up in Tarifa. And that was really good, because when I pulled up in Tarifa, there were quite a few people that I follow on YouTube, all parked up. I mean, it was just incredible, really, and nothing was planned. I didn't know that these people were going to be there, but, you know, people you've probably heard of. There was Kite Van Man and John and Mandy and Eamon and Beck, the Explorers, those weirdos. So, yeah, a lot of people down there that I've been following, and it was good to meet up. And during the course of a few days, we got talking, and basically what happened is that myself, Kite Van Man, another couple, Ellie and Charlie, and also Eamon and Beck, decided that we would go off to Morocco. So literally on the last day of January, we set off and booked our ferry tickets, and we caught the ferry and went across to Tangier Med. And then we spent the next couple of weeks or so travelling together. We got down as far as Marrakesh almost, and then my ex-partner, who's still my best friend, she decided that she would come over and spend a month with me in Morocco, and we've been many times before, so it was good to be able to meet up again. So I picked Nikki up from Marrakesh airport, and she stayed with me for a month, and we travelled literally down to the south of Morocco. Spent some time, in places that we've really enjoyed over the years, and gradually we made our way back up north towards the end of Nikki's stay, and we met up again with Eamon and Beck in Essaouira. And unfortunately, that was really when all the problems started. Nikki got an email to say that a return flight to Italy, where she lives, has been cancelled, and we should contact Ryanair with regards to trying to sort out alternatives. But we tried for days and couldn't get through to Ryanair, so that was seemed to be a non-starter. By which time lots of lockdowns have started, restrictions have started, and it was getting a little bit sketchy. And a friend I'd got in Morocco had said to me, to be careful, he said, because whereas in most European countries, if they decide to go into a lockdown or put restrictions in place, then they would give you a date, be it a week or two in the future or whenever. Whereas in Morocco, they tend to sort of make a decision, and it's there and then. It's that period of that immediate time. So he said, just to be careful, just in case you get stuck in Morocco. Nikki and I decided that we would drive almost directly back up to Tangier Med and hopefully get a ferry back into Spain, which we did. We were lucky enough to catch the last ferry going back into Spain. And that proved to be a good decision, because Eamon and Beck were stuck in Morocco for another 2 or 3 weeks, if not more, and eventually they had to fly back to Canada and leave their van in Morocco. Kite Van Man was stuck down in the very south of Morocco in Dakhla, and it took him over nearly 2 months before he could even think about getting out of Morocco. So we were lucky. But of course, the flights all being cancelled and the ferries to Italy had been cancelled. So it meant that we drove all the way across Europe, really back up through Spain, into France, across France and into Switzerland, where I dropped Nikki at the Swiss-Italian border. The Italian authorities wouldn't let me drive into Italy with the camper. But Nikki, because she lives in Italy, was allowed through with a special permit, and she could then get a train back home. So that put me on, as I say, the Swiss-Italian border at Chiasso. And so then I started to drive back across Europe. And of course, by this time, all of the restrictions and the lockdowns were really in place, and no one really wanted us. So it's just a question of really heading back towards the UK. It seemed to be, at the time, the best thing to do. So I drove back through Switzerland, back into France, a little bit of Germany, and then France again, and Luxembourg, and eventually Belgium. And fortunately, although I'd got stopped in one or two little checks by the police, I was allowed to go on. I was saying I was going back to the UK, and they were saying, fine, if you're going back to your home base, then that was fine. I could continue. And eventually, I got back to the end at the end of March into the UK, and I then spent basically April, May, and June on a farm in the Bedfordshire area of the UK. It's a place I knew quite well. I knew the owners, and they were quite happy for me to stay there, during the course of the lockdowns and what we thought at the time would just be, the pandemic at that stage, and it wouldn't be that long before things would start to improve and get back to normal. We all know now, obviously, that's not been the case. But nonetheless, I spent those 3 months in the UK more or less self-isolating continuously, apart from going out to buy shopping, get shopping and food supplies. I really, other than going out for a walk, and I was really fortunate because the farm backs onto quite extensive woodlands and a forest area, so I could go off and walk for kilometres and kilometres without really meeting hardly anyone, if anyone. So that was good. But then, as we got towards the end of June in the UK, they said that some of the restrictions were to be eased, and I decided then that I was going to try and set off again. I was getting a little bit bored, despite being in a good place. Always have itchy feet. I've never been any different. And so, as we got into July, I started to prepare the camper and get things done. It needed some change of tyres, and I needed to get the MOT done, the mechanical inspection, which I did. I organised all that, and eventually I took a ferry towards the end of July from Dover to Calais. And then once in France, I just basically travelled as I've always travelled in the past. There was not really any restrictions, despite what one was reading in online and in hearing on the news. I didn't find any restrictions whatsoever. I was just free to travel as I've always done in the past. So I travelled across France into Spain. Again, there were no restrictions, no checks, nothing. So carried on along the northern part of Spain, and eventually came into the north of Portugal. It's a long time since I've done really much touring in Portugal itself, so that was going to be quite something for me. And so I travelled literally down through Portugal, and then of course there was all the talk about possible second peaks of the COVID-19 pandemic and more restrictions coming in. So I came down towards the Algarve in Portugal, and then crossed back into Spain, and this was towards the end of October. I didn't really know what to do because there were lots of rumours about what the new restrictions might mean. Nothing was really clear at the time, so I just carried on travelling. I went up and down the coast, and eventually I got into the area of Murcia, and a couple of places I've stayed at many times and really enjoy around the Mazaron area. And while there, it became apparent that Spain was obviously suffering a little bit with some really high spikes in various places, and they came out with some new restrictions. that effectively meant that you couldn't travel between regions. So it was not going to be possible to travel between, say, Murcia and Andalusia. If you're going to get stuck somewhere, you really want somewhere where there's places to be, and where the weather hopefully is going to be quite decent through the winter. And I decided then that I would come back down into Andalusia, which I eventually did. And it was strange because although the new restrictions were saying not only could you then not travel between regions, but they actually then came down even closer and said that you couldn't actually leave the municipality that you were in. So once you're in, municipalities are quite small, and once you're in one, then you wouldn't be allowed to go into the next one or whatever. And that was really quite restricting, in as much as at the time I was in Los Galados, and that's quite a small municipality. There are no decent supermarkets or anything. So that was going to be quite harsh. But in order to try and make the situation a little bit easier, I actually checked into a campsite there. They gave me a good rate if I stayed 30 days, and I thought, well, I'd give it a month, and hopefully things will improve. So I stayed there for the month of November, but by the end of November I'd got really, really bored and itchy feet. I wasn't particularly enjoying the campsite, so I decided to take my chances and leave. So beginning on the 1st of December I left. Was fully expecting to get stopped in police checks, turned around, or told I couldn't travel from one area to the next, but nothing. Absolutely nothing, despite what I'd been reading online, what I'd seen on people giving updates on YouTube videos, etc. I didn't see a single policeman. There was no police road checks, nothing at all. And so I just continued down through Andalusia, and I stayed for a period of time in Cabo de Gata, another place I really like. And I'm gradually making my way near a little bit further south, and probably will end up in Tarifa around Christmas, maybe just after Christmas, which will be a complete 12-month cycle. And the interesting part is that keeping up with friends on YouTube, I know that John and Mandy will probably be down there at the same time, as will Kite Van Man and one or two others. So it may well be that in January, exactly like this January of this year, we'll all meet up once again in or around Tarifa, and be able to sort of spend a little bit of time together. From there, I really don't know. It depends, what next year brings. Obviously now, as far as the UK is concerned, we've got the vaccine, which has been distributed, and people are being given the vaccine. I know that in Italy that's the same, and I'm sure that will happen in most of the other European countries. So hopefully, with the vaccine being given and the other restrictions in place, we will start to see a drop in the number of new cases and the number of deaths with regards to COVID, and we can then start to travel a little bit more as we used to. Whether we ever get back to the way it used to be, who knows? I don't know. So basically, that's the year. It's just flown past, and I have to be honest and say that at the moment, I'm in an area where I've got a town not far away. I'm managing to travel without restriction, and everything really looks normal and feels normal, even though there is the restrictions in place. But they're not. It seems almost as if there is one rule for the locals and one rule for the tourists, because even if you see a police car or whatever, nothing's said. They just let you keep going, or if you're parked up somewhere, they drive past you. They don't stop and say anything. So at least from that point of view, travel's okay. So I just have to see how things go in the new year. Fingers crossed that things do improve. Time will tell.